Hey everyone, welcome to the live stream. This is Eric Keller again. We're starting a new project today, and should be interesting to see the reaction to this because I am doing, an earwig. Yeah, the earwig, one of the least liked insects in the world, and also one of the most common. You probably find them all the time running around your garden, occasionally in your house. They're a very generic insect. The reason I'm choosing this one is because I'm actually using it as part of a project for an entomologist. And this is an insect that he uses a lot of times for teaching insect anatomy. So it's a really good overview of insect anatomy. Plus, you might find some interesting and surprising things along the way. So that's why I'm choosing it. Also, I did the last project, the ant, from scan data. And so for this one, I'm doing it from illustrations. So you can see how I started. If I don't have scan data, my process for creating an insect model based on photographs and illustrations. Good thing about the earwig is it's got loads and loads of reference. This is just from like 5 minutes of collecting Google images, but there's loads and loads of them because it's such a common insect. So that makes it a little bit easier. We even have some nice SEM diagrams and that kind of thing, so it should make some parts a little bit easier. You can see here's a head here. So again, it's a very humble insect, nothing to get super excited about, but if you want to create insect creatures that have some grounding in reality, this is a good one for getting an overview of how insects actually work. As typical with insects, you have 6 legs. Insects always have 6 legs. Those legs might be in different shapes or sizes, but they're always there. Well, in the adult form anyways. And they also have 3 main body parts. We have the head, the thorax, and the abdomen. This one, of course, has the famous forceps, these appendages that stick out the back that look very scary. But these insects are completely harmless to people. They don't do anything. So the reason that people don't like them is purely based on the ick factor, because they look kind of icky. So that's what we're going with. And then you can see the antenna, fairly straightforward. Again, not a super difficult insect to do, although it's always dangerous to say that at first. It does have wings, a pair of wings that are hidden under the elytra. If we take a quick look at the Wikipedia page, which is not a bad place to start when you first do an insect. Like if you're doing something for a client or a project, Wikipedia is a nice place to start, just because they always have this chart right here, which gives you the basic idea of where it fits within the tree of life. So we have Animalia, Arthropoda, clad is Pancrustacea. Underneath that we have Insecta. Sometimes they put it under Hexapoda. By the way, just so you know, there are several different forms of taxonomical structure. They sometimes differ here and there in the way that they organize life. But again, remember, it's a human construct, so it's going to be subject to variation. But generally it's under Insecta, Dermaptera. This one is under the family Forficulidae, and it's Forficula auriculata, and I can't pronounce that, but I'm thinking it's like kind of like I don't know. Forficula, just like Dracula, right? All right, that was a stupid joke, but anyways, there'll be more of those. Okay, so we'll get into more of this kind of stuff later. But right now, let's just get started. So the way I generally start a project like this, if I'm working off diagrams, I find a nice, very basic diagram, something I get the proportions down. So I'm going to use this one, which is a adult female earwig, and or we could go with this one, something that's just symmetrical and really basic, so that it's easy to trace out. And so I've imported that into a new ZBrush project. You can see here's the texture right here. So I'm going to go. I have my grid set up. so that I can see the z-axis in the background. That way, if I use X symmetry, it's symmetrical along the center line. And I'm going to go in the draw palette. Oh, I've docked it right here. Draw palette. And scroll down. And find the front back. Click on map 1. Choose that texture. And now it's mapped to the back here. And then what I want to do, of course, is I want this to be centered. So let's bring up the opacity here a little bit. Set the fill mode to 3. And then just go over to the horizontal offset and see if you can find that center line. This is the center line right here, so we'll go right here. So if you're using these sliders, you can see it's a little bit fussy here. I want to get as close to the center as possible, so I'll use these two appendages as a guide here. If you click on this little slider button and then click again, there's a little ghosted slider right above it that's a bit more sensitive, so you can use this as a way to kind of dial in the value a little bit better. So let's see, let's go look at the head here and see how close that is. Not close at all. We really want the head to be as close to symmetrical as possible, so let's just move this a little bit. Use this center line, maybe that's a better way to go. And then I'll click on this little slider right here till I see that ghosted slider, and then just bring it in like this. There we go, something like that should work. The nice thing about using this on the grid, of course, is that you can zoom in and zoom out, and it's always there on the grid, and that can be quite helpful. And so there's a bunch of different ways you could go about doing this. I could lay down some spheres or just some geometry and push it in place, but I like Z-spheres because they're very easy to position. And you just pull out the legs real quick like that. So I'm going to go into the subtool palette. Let's click on, let's click right here and choose our Z-sphere. The Z-sphere is a really great tool. They're unique to ZBrush. And I'm going to press W for move mode. And if I have symmetry on, that means as I move it up, it'll stay in the middle there. And I'm going to use basically model on this side, and just it'll mirror everything over to this side. I'm not going to worry about the wing just yet. I'm not sure if I'm going to do the wing in this model or not. But let's put this right about in line with the thorax there. This is nice because it also has some of the terminology there. And then I'm going to go right here. Let's press Q for draw mode. So as I'm hovering over the Z-sphere, you can see it turns green every once in a while. That's showing you where an ideal spot to put a new Z-sphere is. So I'm just going to go to the middle here till they snap together. That way I know I'm creating a new Z-sphere right at the middle. And then I'm going to click on that one to add another one. Let's go to the front view. W for move mode, and we'll move this up. I'm going to lower my draw size. And E for scale. We'll just scale up like that. When I'm using Z-spheres, I tend to not go into a whole lot of detail. I can put that into the actual sculpt. I just really want a placement for the basic parts, and then I get the basic proportions down. So I'll go Q for draw mode again, and then add another one here at the end, and one more again. And E for scale. Q for draw mode. The end of the abdomen, let's add one more in here. E for scale. And then we'll do these little appendages here. Go to the side view and move this up a little bit. And then for the legs, I go to the bottom here, and I'm going to do Q, and again. Get that draw size down. There we go. If your draw size is too large, it's going to have a hard time figuring out which Z-sphere you're trying to grab. Let's go to the top view again. I want to go match with this side right here, so see the drawing is not perfectly symmetrical. That's no big deal. Just do like this. I think most people, when they start doing an insect, they go for the most exotic ones that they can find. I can understand the impulse to do that. You know, you could do like a mantis or something like that. But again, I usually say, if you want to learn insects, start with an ant, because ants are cool, but they're also a very straightforward insect in terms of the anatomy. But this is like a nice close second. The animation I'm going to be doing for the end result of this one is going to be a discussion of insect mouth parts. And like I said, I'm doing this. This is going to be part of Entomology Animated, which is a project I started a long time ago and it's been neglected the past few years. So I'm trying to get back into doing more of that. And so this is a good start. And I'm not going to worry about the eyes or even the antenna. I can do the antenna later. Well, I changed my mind. I'm going to do some antenna really quickly. Pull these guys out. And just add a couple joints. Just get their placement down. And there we go. The rest we can take care of in sculpting, and I'm not going to worry about the wing. Just going to do this body, and I can always attach the wing later on. Okay, so there's our Z-sphere. So I'm going to save this, and you can see when I save my projects, my insects, I generally save. I structure my directory based on the taxonomy, and I do that mainly because it forces me to learn the taxonomy of whatever I'm working on. But it also is just a helpful way to organize things. And then I have this large library of all kinds of insects that I've done throughout the years in this directory structure. So I'm going to go into the ZBrush folder, and then I'll just call this F_Auricularia. And this is a female model, but I'll just... Oh, we could do female. I picked female because that's what the diagram is. And we'll call this 01 just to start with. And I can also save the project. The reason I save the project is it will save the grid with the project as opposed to just the model. So... Okay. Now let's turn this into a mesh. I'll turn this off for a second just so we can see the Z-spheres. And so what we can do is if we go, we're in the subtool, or the tool palette rather, tool palette, we have our Z-sphere selected, and we're going to go down here to adaptive skin. And if I turn on preview, it's going to show us what the skin looks like. If I turn on wireframe, we can see that this is actually a Dynamesh. So the default for Z-spheres, and it's been this way for past few versions, is to go directly into Dynamesh. If you don't want that, what you can do is you can turn preview off, go to demesh resolution and set this down to 0. Now if I hit preview, it's going to be a regular mesh, polygon mesh, all quads. There might be some triangles. I think it's all quads, but regardless. And it has some subdivision levels as well. Oh, nope, there's some triangles there. So you can use that method, and then you can turn off the preview and change, radius, density, and that kind of thing, and turn on preview again, and you'll get variations. I'm not going to go into all the settings there. I'm going to do the Dynamesh version because that's what I usually end up doing anyway. So I'm going to set the Dynamesh resolution to, let's try 256. Preview, that'll work. And notice it creates polygroups for you. So, and I'm just going to cut up the model based on my own polygroup. So remember, this is in preview mode, so if I hit the A hotkey, it switches back to Z-spheres. I don't want to sculpt in preview mode. Rather, I want to make a copy of this and sculpt on the copy. The reason you don't sculpt in the preview mode is if I start sculpting and I switch back to Z-sphere and change something and switch back to the mesh, it's going to mess everything up. So I don't want to do that. So instead, what I'm going to do is make adaptive skin, and it creates a copy right here. You can see this is not a preview because if I press the A hotkey, nothing happens. So this is a mesh. And then what I like to do is go back to my Z-sphere version and append that mesh to here. So I have just everything within one tool because I don't really want to be bouncing between these two. I wish it would just append the Z-sphere model as a new subtool. Could probably write like a Z script to do that, or probably somebody has, but I'm just going to append it here. There we go. And I'll turn off the Z-sphere version and work on this one. And then what I'm going to do is just do some basic pushing and pulling of the mesh to match our diagram a little bit better. Then I'll break it up into subtools and start sculpting each individual part. So I'm going to use the move brush here. And I'm being just really general here. Let's switch to a different material so we can see what's going on. You can actually go into the draw palette, by the way. It's up here. And under fill mode, you notice we have different fills. Fill mode 3 means it's transparent. And you can go in here and play with the enhance factor. So if you want to just see the outline, so you can match the outline better, you can do that. Another thing is this move brush basically moves everything within the radius. We also have this one right here, which moves infinite depth. So that means it's moving everything straight down onto infinity. So this is a good one to use if you're trying to match a profile because it can be more accurate. You don't have sort of the dents and all that kind of stuff on the opposite side because the brush is limited to that radius. And again, I'm ignoring this side. I'm just focusing on one side. I can always change the proportions a little bit later, but remember this is a diagram, so it's drawn by a person, so you have to take its accuracy with a grain of salt, mostly just getting the general proportions off of this. So if this gets annoying, we can always lock the camera, so I'm not accidentally moving the view. All right. If you do make some insects or semi-accurate insects, it's a good idea to build up a small library of the models. You can always use the parts for kit bashing your own aliens later. So if you're starting a new project, you want to design an insect, you might want to just, I think the typical thing most people they do is they start with like a human figure and then try and make it look insectoid. That's okay, but you still end up with basically a human figure with semi-insecty parts. I think another way to go would be to actually model out, at least in rough form, the insect first and then use those parts on as a basis for your own design. It depends. I mean, most people, they see something buggy in a movie or a video game and they say ew, and that's kind of it, but I think that's kind of not very interesting. But then again, I do a lot of work with scientists, so I'm biased towards trying to make things accurate as much as possible. So the legs in this one is slightly different between each pair, but not massively different. So that means that we can probably, I'm putting these here for general placement, but we can probably model one pair of legs and then duplicate it and then stretch the proportions to match the other pairs of legs, which is a massive time saver. And I'll do that like over and over again throughout the process. Okay, so there's our basic earwig. And then I do have plenty of references of the side view and stuff like that. We can get into that later. But I'll squash these down just a little bit. Okay, so there's that phase. And then what I'm going to do is start chopping this up into parts and making subtools out of it. So we'll save this, and then I'm going to turn off the background for the moment. I'll switch over to this white material and then do like Control W for just to make one polygroup out of everything. Control drag and release just to make a new Dynamesh, and then let's switch to our select lasso. Control W. Control W. So insect. Well, we can fix that later. Let's do that one more time. Just doing undo. I'm going to hide this bit and Control W. Let's turn on double-sided. You see, I'm just being very rough about this. Control W. Control W. Control Shift X to expand the selection there, just to get a little bit more in there, and then I'll do Control W. That makes the polygroup a little bit neater. And then Control W and okay, so now we have polygroups. And what I could do now is go down to the Dynamesh settings, turn on group, control drag and release to re-Dynamesh, but this time since I have group on, it's actually going to create closed surfaces for each polygroup, which is nice. So I can just smooth this. And now these are all individual parts. Whoops. Sorry, I meant to be doing shift. I don't have to fuss over it. What I could do right now is go into subtool, split, and do group split. And it's going to make me a subtool for each different polygroup. So now I have my insect parts. So let's save. I'm going to save this. And let's name these parts. That's my Z-sphere, so let's name this. Well, we'll keep that the way it is. And we're going to rename this abdomen. Mid legs. Rear legs. What do they call these? Forceps. Head and thorax. And then what I'm going to do is we're going to start with the head first. I'm going to move this up towards the top here, and then okay. Save this. And let's start with head, because that's where all the personality is. I'm not going to worry about the mouth parts just yet. We'll get to that in a bit. Turn on solo. And just start by smoothing this a little bit. We'll stay in Dynamesh mode for a little while here. What we can do, though, is I'm going to switch to Sculptress mode. That way I can use the shift brush kind of like an eraser to erase all this extra stuff down here very quickly. And we'll just Dynamesh. And I'm going to go into Lightbox under User. Brushes. clay tubes. This one has auto masking on, so that means it won't work with Sculptress. So I'm going to turn Sculptress off, redynamesh, and then just use the clay tubes brush as a way to kind of quickly shape this. And let's bring in some reference. Here's a good one. I'm just using pure ref here. Start with just getting general shape. Let's get a side view real quick. There we go. All right, see if I can flip this. All right, sorry, I'm being very picky here. This is actually the best reference. You get a bulbous part for the eye, but for the most part, it just comes down here. And make some marks so I remember that this is the top, so we can do that with Damien Standard brush. Okay, let's go to the side here. Leave that move infinite depth. So this is, kind of got some cool shapes going on here in terms of just the overall, this kind of thing. So we can for the sniffing. It's allergy season. This is a great alien bug shape, head shape, this kind of thing right here. And we got a lot of the mouth parts in the way. That's going to be the main focus of the animation, so, but I had to kind of extrapolate what the head looks like without them for the moment. So add them in as appendages later, but right now I'm just mostly concerned about the silhouette. So maybe switch to a different material where it's easier to see the silhouette. You can also use this right here. I'm using a Cintiq, so it's a pen tablet. So comme ça. I don't know if that's helpful or not. I'm going to cut the eyes out of the surface in a moment here. I want to just get this close before I do that. Maybe the spot where the antenna come out. Make sure that this is nice and bulbous in the back here. I'm going to use the clay tubes just to kind of cut in right here. Nothing wrong with unknown fruit. Apple's a good place to start, though. Yeah, get me something simple. It just takes a little while to get used to the way that ZBrush works. So I would say sculpting an apple is a good idea. When you get to something that starts to feel more apple-like, what I suggest is because the biggest part of ZBrush is learning where all the buttons is. That takes the longest because it's like when you're learning a new language and you're learning the vocabulary and you just are constantly searching for the word to try and say what you're trying to say. Same thing with ZBrush. So sculpting something simple, and what I would recommend doing to learn it quicker, depends how much time you have. If you can do ZBrush for 15, 20 minutes a day, every day, for a few weeks or whatever, you'll learn it faster than trying to sit down and learn it for 6 hours in one day for a week, because you doing a repetition every single day allows you to reinforce those neural connections so that you remember where all the brushes are, the idea where it works, some of the hotkeys as you're learning it. Whoops. I am using a slightly custom interface here, so I apologize if what I'm doing is a little bit strange, but once you feel pretty good about your apple, I would suggest practicing doing human skulls. Human skulls, one of the best ways to kind of wrap your mind around it. And maybe you have a lot of experience sculpting skulls, maybe you don't. Either way, it's a very familiar object. It's a very useful object, and it also demonstrates it has all, it's got a little bit of hard surface in there, it's got a little organic surface in there. And what I used to do is, and when I taught ZBrush at Noman back in the day, I would have my students, first few weeks, we'd sculpt a new skull every week, and maybe a slightly different style. So you could do a realistic, anatomically correct skull, cartoony skull, robot skull, something like that. Really just to wrap your mind around the way the ZBrush works. And if you do a 30-minute skull every day for a while, you'll get much better both sculpting and ZBrush quicker. You can sculpt a skull, see how far you get in 30 minutes, then throw it out, delete it, never look at it again. And the next day do the same thing. You can even set a little timer on your phone or a clock or whatever, so that you're only spending about 30 minutes or so. Then after that 30 minutes, if you have time, sculpt whatever you want. I think the worst way to learn ZBrush is to say, okay, I'm going to sculpt, the Hulk, and it's going to be awesome because I'm awesome. And then you get really frustrated because the sculpt doesn't come out the way you want it to, because you're just even if you're a very experienced sculptor, and I've taught people before who have years and years and years of experience sculpting with clay, it's still an adjustment. You might know your anatomy really well, but you still have to learn ZBrush. So that's why I think it's a good idea to start with a simple project like an apple or a skull or something like that. Another good way to learn ZBrush is to set your timer for 10 or 15 minutes and just intentionally make a mess in ZBrush. Just pull things around. Like my daughter likes to do when I have ZBrush open. She'll just take a sphere and start pulling everything in every different direction just because it looks cool on the screen. And that's a good way to kind of learn what ZBrush can do, because there's a lot of unexpected stuff you can do with ZBrush. It's every once in a while I hear somebody call ZBrush CAD, computer aided design, which I guess in a way it is, but it's really not. There's a lot of surprising things you can get out of the brushes in ZBrush, so that's why it's worth fooling around, because you might discover a technique you wouldn't have thought of if you were trying to do something very precise. And the other thing I highly recommend is watching Paul Gabriel's live stream or any of his videos or reruns, because he's probably the most knowledgeable person about ZBrush, because he's basically at the heart of ZBrush and Maxon. And especially if you want to do hard surface stuff, he's a hard surface expert. And Ian Robinson's got really great stuff too. And both of them are also experts at printing. I've done some printing before, and I want to get back into it, but I need to get a new printer before I can do that. But if you're interested in that kind of thing, both Paul and Ian are really great live streams to watch. A lot of great live streams to watch. Okay, so that's kind of the basic shape of the head. I could always bring this image and put it on the back as well, but I know that things are going to change and morph while I go, so I'm not going to get super hung up on accuracy at the moment. I'm just trying to block out the parts and figure out essentially where they are. But I think the next thing I'm going to do is work on the eyes, getting the eyes in place. So right now I have these blobs that are drawn on, so I'm going to actually kind of carve them out here. Let me save this, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to draw I'm going to mask this. I'm holding the control key, just painting a mask over where the eyes are. I'm going to make them a separate subtool, because then it'll be easier to wrap the exoskeleton around the eyes more convincingly. So painting a mask, and then Control W to make a polygroup out of that. And then I still have my group setting on for my Dynamesh, so if I do Control Drag to re-Dynamesh, you can see now these are separate objects. And I can, Control Shift click on this. And I'll do split hidden. Now I have a subtool for the head without the eyes and a subtool for the eyes. So from here, I'm just going to use that clay tubes brush to kind of dig in. Oops. There we go. So I'm holding the Alt key to invert the brush so I can dig in here. So I've heard, my YouTube channel, I've been posting videos. I did a new one last week. I've done a couple YouTube videos on the ZBrush for the iPad, so you can check them out on my YouTube channel, Bloopatone. And I'm going to do some more. I'm going to start doing more and more stuff on the iPad as well, because it's got some very, very different interface, but it's also very cool. But, I get interesting comments, most of them positive. There's always the comments from the people who are complaining about having to pay for ZBrush, which, it's like for a long time when ZBrush was Pixelogic, they started out with this policy of a universal perpetual license. So you pay for it once and get free updates for life. I think when they originally created that policy back in 2000, or maybe it's 1999, they weren't really thinking clearly as business people, because they still got to pay developers to develop the new versions, right? So these are programmers. And if everybody ends up with ZBrush and nobody's paying for it, how do you pay the people that work for ZBrush? And so when Maxon took it over, they changed the policy, and it's just the way it is. It's subscription like everybody else. It's just the way of the world right now. But the other comment that I've heard that I think is kind of annoying is people saying that ZBrush has too many features and blah, blah, blah. A lot of stuff that the average user doesn't use. Well, me personally, I've been using ZBrush professionally for over 20 years now, and it has actually, I've been lucky enough to make a good living off of it. Some years are better than others, obviously. Trying an experiment here. So just using the inflate brush to add a little bit of inflation. I'm going to dynamesh this. Let's increase the resolution. But the other thing I always mention is that ZBrush from the beginning has always been an experimental program. It was not designed to be like every other program, 3D program. And so that's why it has a lot of features, because a lot of them are experimental. And some of them work out, some of them don't. Every once in a while, a feature is removed, very rarely, but you know, for legacy reasons, something that just people don't use or whatever, or didn't work out the way they expected to. Like, I don't know that many people that use shadow box. It's other feature, which I think is still part of ZBrush, but could be wrong. So they can kind of feel confusing because of that. But these experimental features, sometimes they do incredible things you can't do with other programs very easily. And so that's why I don't really complain about it. Oh yeah, yes there is. Okay, so that's a great question. I'm glad you asked that. Is there any way to put some favorite brushes on the bottom tab, just like how you customize some brushes like Dynamesh? Because every time opening ZBrush menu feels a bit heavy for new user. Okay, I will show you how to do that. Most definitely. Let's save this real quick. So the first thing you need to do is go into Preferences, and under Config, right here, turn on Enable Customize. So this is your safety switch. Think of it like a safety on a gun. The reason it's off by default is so that you don't move buttons around by accident. So turn on Enable Customize. You'll see a little shift in the interface. Don't worry about that. It'll snap back to its regular size when you're finished customizing. So now we're in customization mode. So if you want to move some brushes, there's a very specific way to do it. You don't want to move the brush buttons from this menu, the quick menu. You want to go into the brush menu, and you're going to be moving these smaller icons right here, not this big one, because again, this is a link to the brush library, right? So if you put this on this large button right here on your interface, it's just going to open up this library. So instead, you got to move these brushes down here. So let's start with, say, like Damien Standard. So I'm going to go down here to this icon, Damien Standard, Control Alt, and drag it and put it wherever I want. If I want to put it down here, I can put it down here. There's Damien Standard. A few other ones that I like to use. Again, you want to go to this brush menu right here, not this one. Brush menu right here. Inflate. Put that guy down there. Brush menu. Move. Brush menu. Move infinite depth. Now the problem is like, what if you have a brush that you want to use but you don't see it in this area right here? This is just basically a list of recently used brushes. So all you're going to need to do is go into the brush library, find the brush you want to use, like let's say the morph brush. You can always restrict the view here. I'll just press M for morph brush. And there it is. So I'll just select this for the moment. Then go into the brush menu, select a different brush. You can see morph is down here now, so I can bring this down here. So once you have your brushes loaded and positioned where you want them, you can stick them over here if you want, or other places, whatever. You want to go into Preferences. You can turn off Enable Customize. But most importantly, before you do anything else, make sure you do Store Config. And next time you load up ZBrush, these brushes will be right here. Now, if you're loading up a custom brush, what I want to do is, rather than go into detail, I have a video on this on my YouTube channel. So let me show you that real quick, just where you can find it. Okay, so my channel is YouTube as a bloopatone, and if I go down here to videos, these are my recent scanning ones. Right here, customize interfaces and custom brushes to the interface in 2026. So watch this, because this talks about moving, here I'll move my hands just like the icon. Moving those custom brushes into the parts of the interface so that they load the next time you load up ZBrush. So check out that video, because it talks about the new way that ZBrush 2026 handles custom brush presets and other custom aspects, because they've changed the folder structure. So please check that out, and that'll give you a nice detailed explanation on how to do that and how to deal with problems that might arise in case you did it a different way or did it the old way. So hopefully that answers your question. I change my custom interface all the time, so sometimes I'll have brushes down here, sometimes I don't. Cool, so I have customized this off, store config, and now I'll select my move brush. Later on, when I get the head shaped close to the way that I want, I'll actually go in and detail the eyes, but I'm not going to do that just yet. Now, the way that I use Dynamesh, which is the mode I'm in right now that creates this type of topology. So every time I control drag and release, it redoes the topology. But as you can see, this sort of triangulated net. And the advantage of Dynamesh is that, if I pull things out and re-Dynamesh, it creates an even spacing and distribution of polygons to eliminate that stretching. So it's really good for the blockout phase. So I always equate Dynamesh in the way that I work as being kind of like if you were in a life drawing class and you're just sketching out the initial lines very lightly to find the forms before you actually go in and start to draw outlines, or however you like to do your life drawing, before you commit to those lines. So Dynamesh is the non-committal phase. Once you've got basically where you want to be, then I use Z-remesher to create a more a topology that I can add subdivisions to, and something that's going to be a little bit easier for detailing and that kind of thing. So I'll do that eventually once I have this worked out the way that I want. So I'm going to press W for the gizmo, Alt click right here, hold the Alt button, click on the orientation, and just move this into place. Let's clear any masks. If I'm getting that, I'm going to turn off dynamic. So this is the symmetry button. So since you're learning ZBrush, let me explain the symmetry button really quickly. So to turn on symmetry, you go into transform button and you turn on activate symmetry. Then you can activate the axis. The hotkey for this is X. So if I press X, you can see I just have one orange dot. Press it again, now I have two orange dots. Symmetry, non-symmetry, right? So if this button is off, then symmetry is being based on the grid itself, the world position, global symmetry, however you want to call it. It's not based on the surface, just on where the center line of the actual grid is. If I turn on LSym, local symmetry, you'll see a couple things. First of all, I have this white dynamic button that's turned on by default. I'm going to shift click this to turn it off, so that now I just have local symmetry with dynamic turned off. Now the symmetry is based on the surface and not the grid. So it's a certain symmetry, since this object is at the grid, it's kind of the same. But you'll notice that with local symmetry off, sometimes I get a different behavior than with local symmetry on, especially if I start moving things around with the gizmo. Of course, now it's behaving. But sometimes if you're working with symmetry and things are acting kind of weird, turn on that local symmetry. Now, dynamic symmetry, on the other hand, if I click on this to turn it on, so the white dynamic is now turned on. Actually, you don't have to hold the shift key, you can just click on that. Now symmetry is based on the position of the gizmo. So if I hold the Alt key and move the gizmo here, see how the symmetry is based on the position of the gizmo? And this also includes the rotation of the gizmo. So there's a good example of something acting very, very strange when I rotated it, because symmetry is now based on this position of the gizmo. So I'm going to undo that. I turn off dynamic symmetry and rotate again. I don't have that weirdness. If I turn off local symmetry altogether, in this case it works pretty well. But if you have weirdness when you're working with symmetry, like what you just saw there, check to see what mode this is. Most of the time when I'm sculpting, I like to have local symmetry on with the dynamic button off. The only time I turn the dynamic button on is if I'm working symmetrically, like let's say you're doing a sculpture and you're working on a head and the head is already posed like this. So yes, I'm using every chance I can to plug my YouTube channel. So I have a dynamic symmetry right here to explain how dynamic symmetry works. So you might want to check that out. And one thing is that the reason I call my little videos I love is not because I'm just a massive ZBrush fanboy. It's for me, I get sick of going on YouTube and seeing all these videos saying, you know, you're using this wrong, you're doing this wrong, what they didn't tell you about this, they lied to you about this, what nobody says about this. It's like all this, it's like negativity, man. So my I Love ZBrush series is really just an effort to make it more positive and fun. So I'm not making a YouTube video to make you feel like an idiot for not knowing something, because nobody's born with this stuff. Rather, I'm highlighting a particular feature that I think is cool and that I'm sharing with you in a positive, warm, happy, baby puppy kind of way. Okay, I haven't used ZBrush in 4 years due to taking a break. Has there been any major changes or tools added? Yeah, there's been a lot in the last 4 years. A lot of it is some esoteric tools that, a lot of times I'll add tools to it and I'll get really excited about it, use it for a while, and then I get back into old habits and I forget the tool actually exists. But there's so many, it's hard to name them all off the top of my head. You can always go back through the archives of ZBrush videos and watch, they usually, every time they do a major update, Paul comes out with a video that covers the new features. So you can go and check those out. One of the biggest new features is the one I kind of mentioned, is the lightbox now is separated into Maxon and user. So you can have your own custom lightbox with links to your own custom brushes, tools, textures, etc., or you can switch over to the Maxon one. And these are ones that are in the folder, in the ZBrush folder, your program files. They're doing this largely because they're changing the directory structure so that you can move around your personal stuff, and then you can go into preferences, and whenever there's an update to ZBrush, rather than moving everything from the old folder into the new folder for the new version, you could just point ZBrush to your own custom folder using the asset directory, and then ZBrush will load stuff into Lightbox or the interface based on that. And the reason is this is very useful is a school like Gnomon, or sometimes a company that has many different users using the same machine, they can now use the user's profile to load those custom folders rather than everybody pointing to the same startup folder on the program files. So it makes it easier for administrators to allow users to customize ZBrush. But it's also very convenient because, again, it makes it very easy whenever they create a new version of ZBrush. That's one of the biggest changes. There's a lot of other stuff in the tools, everything from Slime Bridge, which is kind of a little gimmicky. I don't use it that much. There is probably one of the big one is we've had CModeler for a while, but now we have the Retopo brush, which is kind of like if you used Maya, it's kind of like Quad Draw in Maya. It allows you to do retopology in ZBrush without having to go into another program. And it's very good. It's very robust. I use these guys together, CModeler and Retopo, when I'm doing retopology. Then there's been updates to ZRemesher and some backend stuff, and then quite a bit. another one of my new favorite features is the. This is another reason why I recommend watching Paul Gabriel's live stream, because he gets into this even more. But there is the what do we call it? The thick skin. This is one of my favorites. Let me save this guy real quick. I'm just going to go in here and get a surface here. Yeah, I think, yeah, some with plugins it's hard to say whether they're going to work into a new version or not, but I'm glad that your old plugins are still working. Sometimes they shift things around and old plugins don't always work. So I just subdivided this sphere, and what thick skin does is, let's take a brush like just regular clay brush. All right, so if I go in here and I hold the Alt key and I start digging in with the clay brush, you can see each time I press in the surface, it's digging in a little bit further. Same if I do this, it's pushing out a little bit further. That's the normal way that these brushes work. If I turn on thick skin, what it's going to do is I have this thickness slider. If I move it up or move it down, it looks like I'm inflating the surface. But when I let go, it snaps back to what it was. This thickness slider is a preview for how thick do I want my skin to be, right? So I'll just make it a little bit like 8 or something like that. And this is relative to the scale of the object. Now as I start to sculpt on the surface, see how it's only going up to a certain point and then it's stopping. So this is great for creating like hard surface detailing, but also just for if you're doing like engraving. And it works both ways. If I hold the Alt key, it's only going to go down to a certain point and then it's going to stop, right? And then I brush over it, we get this kind of thing. But if I brush over the parts that I've already sculpted, that thick skin is relative to the shape of the object when you just turned it on, right? So you can get some really cool stuff going like this. And then if I turn thick skin off and turn it on again, now it's going to be based on that, what it was when I turned it on, where the thick skin was. Now, we had to be careful is if you're in Dynamesh mode or you change the topology of the surface, that can mess up thick skin a bit. And I can't remember if it works with, yeah, it works with subdivision. So you can have multiple levels of subdivision. But if you change that subdivision, and it can screw things up. So you want to turn off thick skin before you set your subdivision level and turn it on again. The other thing about this you have to be careful is since it's kind of hidden here down in the tool palette, you can forget that this is on. And this button will be on. If I save this tool, close ZBrush, open up ZBrush, load this tool, this button will be on. So if that menu is hidden and you start sculpting on it and you start to get really, really weird behavior, double check and make sure you haven't left the thick skin on by mistake. Yeah, it's basically, it's sort of like, yeah, it's based on the normals of the surface, but it's like, it's sort of putting into memory, like the undo construction history here, sorry, the undo history. You could think of it sort of like another way, like of doing a morph target in a way. It's storing that surface into memory and using that as a reference point. So when you start sculpting on it, it's calling back to that stored version of the model and building up onto that only out to a certain thickness. Let's see. So that's that thick skin. That's just one other new feature. There's some other stuff like I haven't used Stager nearly as much as I should. Stager is is a great posing tool, so you can snap back to your default pose, do some sculpting, switch to your posed version, do some sculpting, and move back and forth between those versions. And that could be really cool. So there's a bunch of stuff. Like I said, on my channel, I try and do short little YouTube videos that just focus on a single one or two different features, just to bring you up to speed, maybe stuff you didn't know about. Again, Paul Gabriel's Ask Me Anything or ZBrush Tips videos are really good for picking that stuff out too. I think they're doing more and more, like everybody's doing more and more YouTube shorts, so rather than full-length videos. So if you go to Maxon channel, check out their shorts. You'll probably find a whole lot of cool stuff here. Let's see. Sorry, you get to see. Just as a disclaimer, my daughter likes to subscribe me to all kinds of YouTube channels, sometimes by accident. So don't look at my YouTube subscription list here. But here's some great what's new in ZBrush 2026. So here's a whole playlist of all these different new features. And then if you go, and then we have the live streams, and then ZBrush Summit. So if you watch the Summit video, that's a great way to pick up new features. Getting started. There's Ian freaking out because he's making stuff, doing the Mr. Beast face there. So yeah, lots and lots of reference material here for all the new features. The biggest thing is that ZBrush for iPad, if you don't have an iPad, that's fine. But in the future, I think the interface of ZBrush is going to start to resemble that iPad interface more and more. So be aware that there probably be some changes to the interface. Okay. Oh, look at this. My head is completely upside down. Of course it is. Well, that's unfortunate, but not the end of the world. I sculpted my head and my eyes upside down. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new folder, and let's call this head. And I'm going to put the eyes in there, and also the antenna in there. And let's turn off symmetry for a second. Well, we can use the X hotkey, obviously. And then I'm going to go in the folder icon here, this little gear, and I'm going to choose transpose set. So this will transpose the entire folder as opposed to just the individual subtools. Press W for the gizmo. I'm going to hold the Alt key, click it right here. Hold Alt, move right here, and hold the Shift key so it snaps to 180. There we go. Sorry, Mr. Earwig or Mrs. Earwig, I made your head upside down. It happens. My YouTube channel is bloopatone. That's just my sort of identity name. It's inspired by my first dog, whose name was Blue. Okay, sorry about the head there. Let's save this real quick. It happens. I'm going to worry about the antenna and the mouth parts a little bit later. Instead, I'm going to alt-click on this. Here's the thorax, and let's bring back my reference imagery. I'm just going to use, let's see, I'm going to go into Lightbox. Under User, one of my favorite brushes, SK Cloth. Let's hide the head. So I can just focus on this. I'm just going to etch out the lines here for these different parts. So this is like the elytra. I guess they call it a tegumen here. So I'm just going to block out the thorax now. The version that I'm using right now is 2026.2. Let's see if we can find a decent picture of the thorax. Some good stuff from the head. This stuff is going to change, and I mean, these parts of the insect are going to change and squish around. I just know from experience that it takes a while to really nail the shape. So I'm not going to get super particular at this stage. And I'm just going to kind of let it be. Is it decent? So we can see this is this little semi-transparent shield right here over this part of the thorax, and this on a beetle this would be called the elytra. Maybe they call it something different on this. So in insects, you know, here's the abdomen, insects. This is a little pet peeve of mine. Eggs, the legs always attached to the bottom of the thorax. Even if it looks like this leg is attached to the abdomen, it is not. The initial segments of the leg are right here, here, and here. They're all in the thorax. They're always attached to the thorax. I know this looks like two different pieces because we have the tegument here, or this is the elytra. I forget what they call this. Again, that's something that could be, they have different names depending what you're looking at. So we're calling this the tegumen. Tegumen, tips of the wings. Pronotum, yeah, this is usually called the pronotum. So, sorry, I'm going all over the place here. So this is the pronotum, which is kind of like a little shield. This is the thorax, a little neck right here attaching the head to the thorax. And then these are the parts. So a little bit of evolutionary history here, evolutionary biology. Original winged insects, which are very, the Meganeura is the most famous example. It's like a giant dragonfly. Original insects, flying insects, had 4 wings, 2 front wings, 2 rear wings. Over the course of evolutionary history, these wings have changed depending on the various different species. So, ant workers, for example, lost their wings. Flies, Diptera, their front wings, I believe it was their front wings, or maybe it was the hind wings. One pair of wings kind of shrunk down into these little nubby things that act as sort of gyroscopic positional indicators for the fly. So they only have 2 visible wings. And mosquitoes are a type of fly, basically. They're in Diptera, so they only have 2 large wings. And then, like beetles, will have the front wings hardened into the elytra, which is more of a shield. They spread out, and you see the hind wings come out, and that's what they use for flying. So even though some of these insects look like some have 2 wings and some have 4 wings, which is correct, they all started out with 4 wings. So you usually find some kind of residual appendage that is one pair of wings that has been adapted into a different purpose. So, okay, that was a basic attempt of explaining biology. I don't know how well it worked. You can see right here, this is all part of the thorax. I don't have a nice side view to show me the thickness of the thorax, though. So let me see if I can do a quick Google search on that. So this is a good example of how a great photographer can make any insect, no matter how ugly it may seem, into thing of beauty. This as well. This is what a great picture of the head there. That one, he actually looks kind of happy. Oh, here's a side view. That's okay. Poor little earwigs. I remember reading, somebody called them aesthetically challenged. They're really ugly, but they're completely harmless. They don't do anything to bother you. They're just living their life, their best life. Ah, there we go. Nice side view. Okay. Reddish and golden bug over a leaf. Not very specific there, guys. Quick, see if we have any more we can use. Okay, these are helpful. Okay. A lot of pictures of earwigs. I could actually just go into the garden and probably find one within a couple minutes. Maybe I'll do that for next week. But I think that should be good for now. I just want a basic idea of the size here. It's kind of like tapering towards the head. That's pretty good. So let's turn the head back on. And let's choose this one. Hide the legs. Lower my Z intensity. Do some shaping with clay tubes. Just get rid of some of this stuff. Eventually I will separate these parts once I get the proportions correctly. The pronotum here, this one appears in a lot of different insects, especially beetles. Beetles are a great insect to model. They're much harder than you think because they could be so tightly, they're so shaped so that they're, when they close up their elytra and everything and their legs, everything is can be very tightly brought together. And that means that there's a massive amount of efficiency in the way that the insect parts fit together. But it can be a real challenge to see that in photographs and diagrams. The problem with diagrams is that they're very 2D and they're very simplified. And also a lot of scientific diagrams, at least in the old days, were copies of copies of copies. So you get some, one artist's bias and how they drew something would propagate down to later versions in some cases. As they improved, photography and microscopes and stuff, later diagrams get better, but there's always a bias in a diagram based on what the illustrator wants to or needs to show. And translating those 2D forms, even if you have multiple views, into 3D shapes can be a real challenge. That's why I like using scan data when I can get it. And there's more and more scan data available for insects every day. It looks like this sort of, yeah, there we go. We can see this line right here. Somehow managed to get something that's not too far off. It looks like it. Now we'll need to get some better images at the bottom. This is the first insect of this order I've sculpted, Dermoptera. So, to me, it most closely resembles a beetle. So, let's take a little break here and find out what Dermoptera means. Okay. Dermoptera. Okay, so this order is pretty much earwigs. 2,000 species, 12 families. Okay, so they're characterized by the cerci, their forceps like pinchers in their abdomen, membranous wings underneath the short, rarely used forewings. They don't fly very much. So the scientific, so this means, you know, if you see this suffix, that basically means wing. So Hymenoptera for bees and wasps and ants, basically because they have sort of a Velcro-like substance on the between the pairs of wings that allow them to attach the wings together. So Hymenoptera. So this one, derma, of course, derma meaning skin, and ptera meaning wing, so skin, wing. Okay. 5 molts before they become adults. Growing up is hard. Earwigs display maternal care. Oh, that's interesting. See, biology is so fascinating. So they love their moms. Mother's Day is coming up. Or, sorry, in Europe, Mother's Day is coming up. In the United States, it's already passed. Female earwigs may care for eggs. Blah, blah, blah. Okay. So the sexual dimorphism is mainly in the pincher, so we're going to pay attention to that when we sculpt that. Okay, always good to take a quick look at some of these things so you understand what you're sculpting a bit better. Oops, I'm going to switch back to clay tubes. And what I might do is I might actually separate these parts out now of the thorax. The thorax is going to be a blob, especially from underneath, until I get some decent reference. But I think that's okay for the general shape. Okay, so we got to do the wing tips underneath. But I think we can make the wings after we separate the tegmen and stuff the wings underneath there. That's probably the best way to go. Look at this grisliness right here. No wonder people don't like them. It's just not very pleasant to look at. But unless you're a creature sculptor, and then it's the coolest thing in the world. Funny thing is, I switched over to doing insects rather than human characters, which is what I got into CG to do in the first place. Mainly because I didn't want to stare at pictures of corpses of human beings and dissected human beings all day. But bugs, they don't bug me. They don't bother me. They don't bug me at all. I never really... I'm excited I never had to do like a zombie TV show like Walking Dead or something like that. Game of Thrones, because I really don't want to look at reference imagery of dead people. And that's pretty gross. I don't want to have to look at reference that's going to give me nightmares. Bugs don't give me nightmares. Okay. Enough of my life story. Let's go here. Control W for polygroup. This is just one way to split up the surface into polygroups. So I'm going to Control Shift click on this. I'm going to Could do an extraction on this, but I'm going to do a polygroup instead. And then I'm going to have to extend this underneath the pronotum. And then I'm going to re-dynamesh that groups button on, so now I have separate surfaces. Same thing I did before. And let's split this up into subtools. So I got the thorax selected here, and I'm going to go down here to group split. I'm going to give you a warning. I'm going to say OK. So now here is my thorax. Here's your pronotum. Let's rename it. And we'll rename this tegment. And then we'll add the wings underneath that. Maybe just the wingtips for now. I don't know. I haven't figured that out yet. And I'm going to select this thorax right here. And let's create a new folder. Call this thorax. And let's save this. Do save next. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go in here really quickly, re-dynamesh this surface, and just kind of go over it with the clay tubes brush to even this out, get rid of some of the lumps and bumps. And this part, most of the work is probably going to go into the underside for where I attach the legs. Super detail for that. Just for now, we'll call that okay. And then pronotum. Let's turn off the solo button. I'm going to shift click on this to turn off visibility of everything. I keep forgetting, speaking of new features, there is this cool feature right here, these V buttons right here. I'm going to shift click on the eyeball so everything is visible. And I'll scroll up and turn off the Z-sphere version. And then if I click on V2, this is like a bookmark for various visibility settings. So right here, everything is visible. I can click on V2 and maybe just turn on the stuff in the thorax. I always forget that this feature is there. It's a really good one. Because now, rather than turning things on and off, I can switch between these two presets, and I can include difference. Like F3 could be just the head, for example. Now it's always going to make visible what I have selected. So if I select the head here and I go to V2, we'll see that part of the head is still visible until I select part of the thorax. This can save a lot of time and button clicking. So I always forget that feature is there, but it's a really good one. So let's go back down to the thorax. That's V2. And I'm going to click on this. Actually, let's do this. Let's go to the wings right here. Oops, I don't want more if I want to inflate. So we don't want this separation right here. We want these to be tucked underneath, as you can see right here. So let's do this. I'm going to turn on Sculptress mode, and I'm going to switch to Snake Hook. And let's turn on transparency. So the Snake Hook is like the move brush, but since, unlike the move brush, it will actually add geometry. If I just have the regular move brush, I'm just moving things around. But if I have Snake Hook, then it's actually creating geometry as I move this stuff. It's really for doing stuff like that, which is cool, but you can also increase the brush side and lower the Z intensity. Maybe that's too much. And use it like a move brush. I think I believe it's Ashley Adams uses it. It's called the Snake Hook brush as her move brush for just about everything. It's great for doing concept artist art when you're trying to find shapes. Don't really need to have this on. I usually turn Sculptress mode like off and on fairly frequently. And again, I use it when I'm finding shapes. Sorry, I have a little allergy attack here. I'm going to turn off Sculptress. I believe we can take a look. Actually, it looks like... Okay, that looks like the wings. That's weird. That's a hard one to figure out. Let's look at this one. Huh? I think I moved those too far. Underneath the pronotum. I just turn Sculptress mode on and just use the smooth brush to kind of erase some of this geometry really quickly. Again, I'm just going to find the basic shapes for now. I'm going to block out everything as much as possible, then get into detailing. So do. Whoops. Turn off sculptures. Okay, now you're just being annoying. Let's do this. For now, I'm just going to turn on Z-Mesh to keep these things from joining in the middle. Can always fix it again later. That's good enough. And I'm going to turn off Sculptor Smooth. Because what I'm going to do next is I'm going to duplicate this subtool and turn it into my wings so that they can poke out the end. So let's duplicate this. Name this one wings. Okay, so we have that. And then we can move on to the abdomen really quickly. Again, this is just blocked out. I'll have more detail later, especially when I attach the legs, or sculpt the legs rather. So let's save this. Okay, so the question is, did you mean that ZBrush interface in the iPad is still going to change, or is it only worth working on it exclusively there? Well, I don't know. It depends. I think the desktop interface, the two of them are going to come closer together eventually. I don't know when, and I don't know exactly how, because I don't work for Maxon. I'm just a ZBrush artist. They let do their stream, so that might be a question for Paul Gavery. And but at this point I would say if you have an iPad, it's worth fiddling around, because there is a test version you can use in the iPad that's free, so you can play with it or check out some of the tutorials on the iPad, because I think some of the ideas from the iPad version are going to end up in the desktop version. So it's more like the iPad version is ahead of the desktop version, from what I understand. There's still all the same tools. I believe it's almost all the same tools. The addition on the iPad is if you have an iPad Pro, you can scan objects directly into the iPad. All the same tools are there, but the palettes are rearranged quite a bit in order to facilitate working on the iPad. And then on top of this, if you like using hotkeys, you can get I got a little like $50 Bluetooth keyboard for my iPad, and that's really helpful because you can use the same hotkeys on the iPad version, and that makes it feel much more like the desktop version. For me, the thing I like the most about the desktop version, other than the fact that I've been using it for so long, I'm used to it, is that I like my 24-inch Cintiq. I need a lot of space to work. But I do like the iPad version a lot because there's a lot of portability to it. So if I'm out somewhere and I have my iPad, I can, sculpt on it, sculpt in front of the TV, that kind of thing. And the portability is really nice. I'm still a little bit slower in the iPad version because I'm still hunting around for things. It's also very customizable. So I don't know if I should advise doing something exclusively on the iPad because I have no idea when or how exactly the desktop version is going to change. But I know that the thinking is that the iPad version is sort of represents the future of ZBrush. And also they released Cinema 4D for the iPad, believe it or not. And the Cinema 4D iPad version, not Cinema 4D desktop, but Cinema 4D iPad version, borrowed a lot of stuff from the ZBrush iPad version, which is pretty cool. It's also cool to be able to do C4D on the iPad. And then I think they are also eventually, for depending on the iPad you have, they're going to have like the ability to render in Redshift and that kind of thing. So that's stuff that's worth checking out. The thing I don't like about the iPad is nothing to do with ZBrush or Cinema 4D. It's just, the saving files locally is such a pain. I had to hunt around in the weird file directories and don't have a directory structure like I do on the desktop. I'm used to the Windows directory structure. So I'm not crazy about that aspect of it. But again, that's not a ZBrush thing, that's an iPad thing. Okay, so I want to do the abdomen next. The abdomen is segmented. It's got these large grizzly openings at the end. And let's count the segments. Always got to count. Well, we could do the shaping first, then I'll do the segments. So I'll turn on my background. So far, it's okay. It's not too bad. Really just the side view. These guys are fairly flat because I had to squiggle around underneath thin surfaces. And sort of kind of a bulbous taper at the end. So a little bit wider here. I'm going to use a clip brush real quick. I'm kind of lower the resolution here for the Dynamesh. Fewer polygons makes it a little bit easier to move quickly. Just kind of marking these shapes for future reference. Okay, nice thing about the diagram is it allows us to easily draw in the segments of the abdomen. So I'm just going to draw this. And then I'm going to increase the resolution. So we take a look at the way the segments go, because it's different depending on each insect. So you kind of want to avoid making too many generalities, but you can see how each segment of the abdomen, this one's tucked underneath, the leading edge is tucked underneath the segment in front of it, and then overlapping on top of the bottom segments, bottom plates. You can see it's also tucked in underneath the bottom plate as well. So let's see if we can find a couple more images to make that more obvious. Yeah. So we have this kind of pattern. So this is similar to like a bee abdomen or something like that, where we have sort of the tucking. I mean, this one is a little bit hard to tell because the photograph is blurry, but this one's pretty obvious that this is tucked underneath this, which is tucked underneath this, and this is overlapping this. So, so the easiest way to deal with that is to turn these into separate plates. And maybe I'll do the plates for the top and get those in a decent spot, and then kind of duplicate them and move them to the bottom, and then use the move brush to kind of tuck them where they need to go. And since I've got about 4 minutes left in today's live stream, I'm going to save that for next week, I think. But what I will do is pull these bits down a little bit. And then again, for this, I can create polygroups for each plate and then separate them the same way I have been. I can do this quickly. It doesn't have to be done, because I'm still going to use the abdomen mesh for the inside, for the interior. These are just going to be laying on top. And I don't have to worry about the overlapping just yet because I will fix that as I create each plate. So you don't have, and I've done this a billion times, so you don't have to, you get faster each time you do it. The first time I did it, I was like going very slowly, deliberately with every single part, and then after a while you realize, you can get away with being messy and fix it later. Main thing is just to get the geometry for all the plates. Actually, the main thing is to always remember to count the number of plates. Nothing more irritating than finding out later on that you have the wrong number of plates. And that's happened to me quite a bit. Whoops. First I want to make this into polygroup. However, I won't make a different subtool for each plate because that makes life difficult. Instead, I could use the mask by polygroups. I don't like to have 10 billion subtools if I can avoid it. Okay, so I'll do, oops. Yeah, let's do this. Go back a couple of steps. And let's see. If the resolution, let's try that again. What we do now is, next stream will be a week, are you talking about my next stream or the next stream for ZBrush? I don't know. You can check out the schedule. Maxon. Let me see. Should have a link to the calendar here. My next stream is the same time next week. Let's see. All right, here's the calendar. So Tuesday, May 19th, 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. Doesn't say which time zone. And then I'm next week, Monday, May 25th. So if you take out the pixelogic.com ZBrush Live calendar, that's when the calendar is. So it looks like the next one is with this one with Andre. But you can always check because sometimes people do unscheduled live streams as well. Okay, last thing I'm going to do before I leave today is I'm going to Control-Shift-Click on this. And let's do Split Hidden. Now I have a subtool for that, and I have a subtool for my plates. You can see that they're kind of grody here. So what I'm going to do is just do a global inflate here. Dynamesh again. Smooth this out. Use the inflate brush. It's going to be ugly for a little bit here until we get this sorted out. But most of the time you can inflate and smooth these artifacts away. If you get this happening, sometimes you can lower the resolution, redynamesh, and that'll fix it. Don't freak out if you see that kind of artifact. It's just ZBrush is a little bit confused. If I do something like this, excuse me. I'm going to do a quick Z-remesh. Actually, let's do this. Keep groups. Just to clean this up a little bit. There's another trick I'll use where it's like, I might want to have a very consistent topology between all the plates. I'm not going to get that from just doing Z-remesh. So what I might do is get one of these to a point that I like, and then just duplicate it and move it down and reshape it to fit where I need to. But we'll see about doing that maybe next week. At least at this point we have some plates here. And then we have a separate mesh here for the abdomen. And I'll work these guys out, duplicate them, put them on the bottom, and then just use the move brush to tuck them into place. But that's where we're at for today. And I will see you guys next week. Thanks for following along, and I hope you enjoyed this. I know nobody likes earwigs, but you know what? It's a good lesson. Okay, so we have a lot of questions here. I'm 18, and you're a huge inspiration. Really new guys about topology. Hard surface like guns and vehicles. I'm okay at hard topology for guns and vehicles and stuff like that. I highly recommend watching Paul Gabriel's stuff. He is the expert vehicles, guns, hard surface topology. I'm more of an organic guy myself. The workflow for these kinds of things, again, is going to depend. You can do retopology and everything in ZBrush if you really want to. Confused about character retopo. Well, you're going to retopo it. So you're either, if you're going to do a character, you're going to retopo it in ZBrush or Maya, whatever your preferred retopology software is. It's really just about getting the proper edge flow. But they've added the retopo brush so you can do that in ZBrush. But remember, it's like, don't think of everything as being a rigid pipeline. Each studio will have its own pipeline. There are accepted best practices, but there is no, this is how you have to do it every single time. If that's true, AI can take all our jobs. And then, yeah, clean deformation topology quality is for mobile PC workflows. That's another skill set. Share your thoughts on base mesh with hand retopo. Well, unfortunately, I can't today because my live stream has come to an end 5 minutes ago. Again, for these kinds of things, this is at least ZBrush live stream. We're going to focus mostly on ZBrush tools. I don't use TopoGun as much as I used to. Retopology brush in ZBrush is a lot like Quad Draw and Maya, so you can use either one. I think you're trying to learn too much as much, honestly. I think you need to start focusing on something and building up a skill set. If you try and learn every kind of workflow all at once, you're never going to get anywhere. So that's what I would say. Yeah, TopoGun is a very nice topology tool. If you like using it, use it. If you don't, you can use the ZBrush retopo or Maya. I used Maya Quad Draw for years. I tend to use the ZBrush retopology brush more and more just because I don't like flipping between the two of them. But really, what I would say, if you really want to learn good animation topology, make friends with an animator so that you can work with them and understand how they want things to deform. Because many animators are going to be very different in terms of their opinion on how topology works. Okay, I hope that helps you out with some of your questions. Again, highly recommend for anything hard surface, check out Paul Gabriel's live stream. He does he has the best knowledge in ZBrush hard surface of anyone I know. Like I do buggies and creatures most of the time.